Hello and welcome to another bad movie review. This time I watched 976 Evil. This is a 1988 film. It runs about 92 minutes. It's directed by Robert Englund. Yeah, that Robert Englund. It stars Stephen Geoffreys, Patrick O'Brien, Jim Metzler, Maria Rubell, Leslie Dean, J.J. Cohen, Sandy Dennis, and Wendy Cooke. Now a lot of the people in here are going to look very familiar because they've done a lot of other work. Most notably is the late appearance in the film by the guy that plays Mark Dark, and that is Robert Picardo, who most of you will know as the ship's doctor on Star Trek Voyager, the only real highlight of that show. But Stephen Geoffreys was most notably recognizable from the movie Fright Night, where he played Evil Ed. Now, people that watched a lot of movies and TV in the 60s and 70s will probably recognize Sandy Dennis. She was in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Splendor in the Grass, and a lot of other appearances in both TV and movies. This was actually the third to last thing she was in. Alright, so we start off with a man walking down the street trying to avoid the sound of phones ringing everywhere he goes. And of course, this isn't going to end well when he decides to answer a payphone receiver, and as soon as he lifts the receiver up, he gets zapped and then set on fire and thrown in a fireball. And that's when our movie really gets going. We meet Spike and Hoax. Spike's real name is Leonard. Hoax appears to be actually his name. It's Hoax Arthur William. And Spike is played by Patrick O'Brien, which a lot of people seem to confuse with Jason Patrick from The Lost Boys. They're different people. They don't even really look alike. They just have that 80s look. But he was in No Holds Barred with Hulk Hogan, so I guess there's that. So Hoax is a seemingly repressed mama's boy. He's a big nerd, dorky, not real popular, gets bullied a lot. When we first meet him, he is sitting on a plastic-covered sofa reading a National Geographic, or more specifically looking at nudie pictures of tribal women, while listening to a televangelist surrounded by cats. Not the televangelist, Hoax. Hoax is surrounded by cats. Because his mom is not only a religious fanatic, but she is a very enthusiastic cat parent. Now, Hoax and his mom are actually the relatives of Spike, who lives over their garage, from what I could tell. And Spike's real name is Leonard, and he's in a little bit of debt to some local 1980s boy band looking guys that are supposed to be the tough guys, but yeah, that didn't age well. On their look. He ends up finding this card with a mysterious phone number on it for a horoscope, Horror scope, and the number is 976 Evil, where the name of the movie comes from. And he decides to call, and you have to type in extension 666, of course, and he ends up getting this like cryptic message that sounds like a pre-recorded message. There's even the obvious insertion of a date in there to really sell it as one of the old phone line services that you could call in and get like your regular horoscope or advice, things like that. There are a lot of very 80s references like this in there because there aren't a lot of like 900 numbers anymore, or these type of local extensions where you could call in and talk to like Santa Claus or get gambling advice, that sort of thing. That's largely gone by the wayside, but in the 80s this was actually a fairly well-known thing, and they'd charge you like $3.99 a minute or something ridiculous like that. So the advice Spike gets is seemingly a little cryptic, but it's enough to get him curious, and he ends up going to his aunt's house and trying to steal some money. And apparently his aunt is holding his inheritance until he's 21, and she has say over that money, and that's obviously causing some rift in the family dynamic there. So he and Hoax are cousins, and while she is lecturing him about needing to find Jesus, it begins to rain fish. This results in a supposed reporter coming around and asking some questions about the raining of fish, and Spike doesn't want to deal with him, but the guy does interview Aunt Lucy, and the guy doing this is named Marty, played by Jim Metzler, who has a pretty good set of credits. He did guest appearances on several TV shows and is mostly a bit part player in a lot of movies. Now, since Spike doesn't want to deal with this guy, you think it's just going to be kind of a one-off, but Marty does does reappear several times throughout the film and becomes kind of one of the major players here. And we do see Spike and Hoax at the high school, and it's pretty obvious Spike has been looking out for Hoax, kind of protecting him and running interference. And Hoax basically worships Spike and really looks up to him and wants to hang out with him all the time, much to Spike's chagrin, although he obviously has a soft spot for the kid. And that dynamic ends up changing pretty considerably over the course of the film. Now, when Spike calls the number again, he gets another cryptic message, and it seems to inspire some criminality, but he doesn't follow through. And that leads to a very strange incident that almost gets him killed, except for the fact that that reporter showed up in the nick of time and saves his life. So Spike still doesn't want to talk to the man, but he does want to hang out with his girlfriend Susie, so he goes to pick her up for their date. And after a brief set of plot points, Susie takes off, and that's when Hoax decides that he's going to break and enter into Spike's apartment over the garage. And he swipes a article of clothing and also finds the little advert postcard for the phone number. And he ends up calling it out of curiosity, I suppose. Now, the cryptic message that he gets puts him on the track to run into Spike's girlfriend and hang out with her, but he ends up getting exposed as kind of a creeper and gets beat up at the same time. And of course, he doesn't stop there. He ends up calling the number several more times, leading him further down into this seemingly demonic rabbit hole. He even follows instructions to perform a ritual where he makes a pentagram out of salt, and bad things result from that. But by this point, he's so far in, he is not going to change. And he continues down this dark path as he slowly gets more and more deranged. He starts to spiral mentally, and it also begins to affect him physically. So he starts growing like claws and having deformations, but it's a slow process, and all during the course of this process, he continues to do evil acts. Now, Marty manages to find out where the 976 number is located, and he goes to their headquarters, but something really weird is going on there too. He talks to the guy that owns the place, Mark Dark, and what he finds is a machine that was supposed to be managing the calls, but it doesn't look like it's been operational for several months. So something really weird is going on. But the more that Marty investigates, the more there is pushback. He does end up getting his own life put at risk several times, and Hoax continues his rampage as he goes after everybody that's wronged him, no matter how slightly. Overall, this is actually a very 1980s horror film. It's a cult classic for a reason. It's very fun, takes itself seriously, but there's a lot of decent lighthearted moments in it as well, and it does end up with the climactic showdown that you would expect. There are several references to the devil and hell in here through imagery and statements, and there is one scene that a lot of people get confused about where Marty and Angela, who is a lady that works at the school, end up at Hoax's house, and there's snow and ice everywhere, and it seems to confuse people, but earlier in the movie, one of the characters made a reference to hell freezing over, and that's the play on words that we're getting here. But that one reference aside, the imagery throughout, including at the very beginning of the movie with the first death, you see a pitchfork over the phone booth where the guy answers the phone, and you see another pitchfork later on in the movie. There's serpent iconography on wallpaper. There's little images of the devil, references to deviled eggs, devil twins, things like that. Just little subtle things that normally would be overlooked in a movie by just casual observers, but horror movie fans are a little more sly than that. They're getting the references that are kind of filtered and sprinkled throughout. And I thought that was kind of a nice touch, but this is a very 80s movie. I didn't see any microwaves in there. One of the characters, Susie, makes her TV dinner in the oven, and I don't think I've seen anybody do that in about 20 years. And there's a butterfly knife. The one bad guy looks like he belongs in a flock of seagulls. And of course, the fact that there are payphones everywhere is very 80s as well. So it really does capture the time of 1988 really well. And it's very obvious this takes place in 1988. They actually say the date several times in the movie. And about 4 of the phone calls to the phone line are taking place on November 29th, 1988. So it is definitely a product of its time, but it works out really, really well. One little fun thing they threw plan was they had Stephen Geoffreys standing next to a poster from Fright Night, which I thought was a really nice touch. So overall, I would have to say this was actually a really well done movie. It is definitely a very 1980s movie, so it's become a period piece at this point, but it is kind of capturing the quintessential horror vibe of 1980s movies, and it does it really well, with a lot of really solid actors from the time, some of whom were just like bit part players in other projects, but they really got a chance to shine here. And I think there were some really good performances. So I'm absolutely going to recommend this. This is a classic for a reason, and it became more popular on VHS when it was released that way, which, by the way, the VHS version is slightly different than the theatrical release. There's actually extra footage in the video version. And yeah, the special effects do look a little dated, but you don't see many non-practical effects. The makeup job's really good, except for occasionally on the oversized hand on Hoax, occasionally near the end. But otherwise, most of the effects were well done. The kills were pretty well done. So overall, a pretty solid film. And it got its R rating probably because of the 8 kills, but there are also 2 plots in the film. And that's definitely worth it as well. So I have to say, this is probably one of the more creative films of the era, but because it involves a phone line, it is dated pretty heavily because I don't think anybody foresaw phone booths going away that quickly. And it did spawn a sequel, so I'll review that one later down the line. But for now, this is a solid recommendation. A lot of good 80s fun, solid cheese horror film that's definitely worth watching, especially because the 80s spawned some of the best horror films of the last 50 years, at least as far as B movies go. So if you're a horror fan that likes cheese movies, this is definitely one you want to add to your collection. And I highly recommend it. I thought it was a blast to watch, and I haven't seen it in well over 20 years, and it was absolutely a great trip down memory lane, as well as a shocking amount of fun. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one.